Once upon a time, in the small, dusty village of Ooredoo, nestled between rolling fields and dense forests, there lived a farmer named Kofi. His skin was as dark and weathered as the earth he toiled, his frame strong from years of labor. Kofi had always been a man of simple joys. His wife, Isi, was his heart, and their soon-to-arrive child was to be the bond that completed their humble family. Life was not easy, but they found happiness in each other, tending to their farm and laughing over evening meals. But fate, cruel as it often is, decided to test Kofi's strength in the harshest way. One morning, as the first sunbeams painted their small thatched hut, Kofi noticed something was wrong. Isi, once full of warmth and life, lay weak and sweating on their woven mat. Her breathing was shallow, and her eyes, once bright as stars, were now sunken with fatigue. Real quick. Stories like this are happening all around us, often in silence. My goal is to give them a voice. If you want to be part of that journey and never miss a case, hit the subscribe button. You won't want to miss what I'm working on next. Alright, let's get back to it. Isi, my love, what ails you? Kofi's voice trembled as he knelt beside her, pressing her hand between his calloused palms. She offered a weak smile, one that held the weight of hidden pain. I'll be fine, Kofi, she whispered. But even as she spoke, a violent cough racked her slender frame, leaving her gasping for air. Kofi's heart clenched, and fear crept up his spine. He knew he could not waste time. The village healer, Mama Zola, was the only person who could help them. He rushed down the narrow, dusty path lined with acacia trees, his feet kicking up small clouds of earth. The village women watched with curious eyes as he sped past, their conversations hushed when they saw the worry etched deep into his brow. Mama Zola's hut smelled of crushed herbs and burning incense. She was old, with skin wrinkled like the bark of an ancient tree and eyes that seemed to peer straight through a person's soul. Kofi explained Isi's condition, his voice strained with urgency. She is weak, Mama. Her breath is shallow, and she cannot hold down food, he said, fists clenched as if to grasp a solution. The old woman sighed, the sound heavy with regret. There is something dark within her, Kofi. I have seen this illness before, and the herbs I possess are not enough to cure it. You need a medicine that I do not have. Her words cut through him like a knife. Then tell me where to find it, he pleaded, desperation bleeding through every word. She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the array of dried roots and small idols on her shelves. There are whispers of a powerful remedy, but it is costly, Kofi. You would need gold to procure it from the city merchants, and even then, the price would be steep. Kofi's heart sank. Gold was a luxury he did not possess. His fields barely provided enough to keep them fed, let alone yield profit. He left Mama Zola's hut, the weight of impending loss pressing down on him. The village seemed to close in around him as he walked back to his home, each familiar sight now tinged with the shadow of despair. That evening, as Isi slept fitfully, Kofi sat outside their hut staring into the dying embers of their fire. His mind raced with possibilities, but each one ended with the same unmovable wall of reality. They had nothing valuable enough to save her. That was when he heard a voice, low and rough, coming from the shadows. I hear you seek help for your wife, said the man who emerged, his figure shrouded in darkness. He was older, with a thin frame and eyes that glinted unnaturally, even in the dim light. This was Kwame, an elder known for his tales of sorcery and dark secrets. Kofi's mouth went dry. Yes, I do. But there is no way. There is a way, Kofi, Kwame interrupted, his tone sharp but enticing. There is one who can help you, but the price he asks is beyond anything you can imagine. Who? Kofi asked, his heart hammering with both hope and fear. Dante, the sorcerer of the Silent Grove, Kwame said, lowering his voice as though the name itself could summon trouble. He can give you riches, power, whatever you desire. But he deals in blood, Kofi. His rituals require sacrifice. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Kofi shivered despite the warmth of the evening breeze. The thought of speaking with Dante was terrifying, but the image of Isi, pale and gasping, haunted him. Could he truly ignore any path that might save her? Kwame must have read the turmoil on Kofi's face because he stepped closer, placing a bony hand on his shoulder. Think on it. Desperation makes men do unimaginable things. Kofi sat in silence long after Kwame left, the night around him whispering secrets of the forest and the dark deeds that hid within. As dawn broke, Kofi knew what he had to do. He had no choice. The next day, he stood at the edge of the silent grove, its tall trees casting long, menacing shadows. The air was thick, and the sounds of the village seemed a lifetime away. With each step into the dense woods, an oppressive silence enveloped him. The path twisted and narrowed until it opened into a clearing with a small thatched hut, almost identical to his own but radiating an aura of dread. Dante was waiting. His frame was lean, draped in cloth stained with odd, dark patterns, and around his neck hung charms that clicked together like rattling bones. His eyes, sharp and deep-set, bore into Kofi as if peeling back the layers of his soul. "You seek wealth, farmer." Dante's voice was low, a rumble that seemed to seep into the very ground. "I seek to save my wife, Isi. I need the riches to buy her medicine," Kofi said, swallowing hard to keep his voice steady. A thin smile crept across Dante's face, showing teeth too sharp and white. "There is a way," he said, turning to a wooden table littered with scrolls and bowls filled with powders. "But the price is steep. You must give life to save life." Kofi blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. "What do you mean?" Dante's smile faded. "Your unborn child, Kofi. You will sacrifice him at birth. Pound his essence in a sacred mortar to release the power that will grant you wealth and save your wife." The room spun, and Kofi staggered back. His son, who hadn't even taken his first breath. A chasm of horror opened in his chest, threatening to swallow him whole. But then he pictured Isi, frail and dying. He felt the cold claws of reality close around him, forcing him to consider the impossible. I can't," he whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of it. Dante tilted his head, his expression almost pitying. "Then watch her die, and you shall have nothing." The words echoed, snapping around him like a trap. As Kofi closed his eyes, feeling the sting of tears, he knew this path would damn him. But the thought of Isi's lifeless body was unbearable. He clenched his fists, blood surging with determination that burned like fire. "I will do it," he finally said, each word tasting of ash. Dante nodded, unfazed, as if he had heard this confession countless times before. "Come back when the child is born," he said, turning his back on Kofi as if the deal was already sealed. Kofi stumbled back into the forest, every step away from the sorcerer feeling heavier than the last. When he finally reached the village, the sun had begun to set, casting an orange glow that did nothing to warm him. Isi lay inside, eyes closed but breathing more evenly. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face, a gesture of love marred by the secret that now hung between them. Whispers of guilt began their relentless assault, but he silenced them with the only thought that kept him going: "This is for Isi. This is for her life." Yet, even as night fell and the wind whispered secrets through the village, he could not shake the feeling that he had already lost more than he could ever gain. The days following Kofi's visit to Dante passed in a blur. His hands continued to work the fields, sowing seeds into the dark soil, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in an endless cycle of doubt and terror. Each night, when Isi's breathing grew shallow and labored, he was reminded of why he had chosen this path. Yet the memory of Dante's cold, unflinching eyes haunted him. Every step he took seemed to echo the decision he had made, a drumbeat of impending doom. The village went on around him, unaware of the choice that would soon shatter the silence. Women washed clothes by the river, their laughter carried on the breeze. Children ran barefoot, their shrieks of joy a reminder of innocence Kofi felt slipping from his grasp. Isi noticed his change in demeanor one evening as they shared a bowl of pounded yam in their dimly lit hut. She reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were thin, the bones more pronounced than they had been just weeks ago. Her touch was a ghost of the vibrant woman she once was. "My husband," she said softly, searching his face. "You have been so distant. Is something weighing on you?" Kofi swallowed, his throat dry, as he forced a smile.
"No, Essie.
"I am just tired from the fields." The lie tasted bitter, but he could not burden her with the truth. It was a secret too monstrous to share, and it would only deepen the pain that already gripped their home. Isi studied him for a moment, her gaze lingering as though she could sense the hidden turmoil beneath the surface, but then a fit of coughing overtook her, bending her frame as she clutched her chest. Kofi's heart twisted as he moved to support her, feeling the frailty in her body that had once been strong. The decision he'd made in the forest weighed on him like a stone pressing down on his soul until it threatened to break him. The next morning, Kofi made his way to the edge of the silent grove, compelled by the need to confront Dante again. He told himself it was to seek assurance, but in truth, he hoped the sorcerer would offer a different path, one that didn't demand the ultimate betrayal. The woods were dark even under the morning sun, and the air seemed heavier the deeper he went. Each step crackled beneath his feet, the dry leaves whispering warnings he couldn't understand. He reached the clearing where the small, ominous hut stood as if waiting for him. The sorcerer emerged before Kofi could call out, his eyes narrowed as if he could sense the doubt that clouded the farmer's mind. "You returned so soon," Dante said, his voice smooth and cold. He crossed his arms, the charms around his neck clinking softly. "Do you wish to withdraw your word?" Kofi hesitated, his throat constricting as he searched for the right response. The idea of backing out pulled at him like an undertow, but then he remembered Isi's frail hand and the cough that had stolen her voice. "No," he said finally, the word trembling. "I just need to understand why it has to be this way." The sorcerer's gaze turned from curious to hard, his eyes black as a night without stars. "You come here seeking miracles, yet you question the price of magic." He stepped closer, his thin frame casting a long shadow over Kofi. "There is power in blood, Kofi. Life exchanged for life. This is the only way to shift the balance of fate. Your sacrifice will bring forth wealth and health, but it must be pure, untainted. A newborn's essence is the strongest force that exists." Kofi shuddered. The explanation did not comfort him, but it solidified the reality of what he had committed to. There would be no way out, no escape from the path he had chosen. His only hope was that once the deed was done, Isi would live, and the weight on his chest would be a burden he could learn to bear. Dante's voice softened, but it didn't carry warmth, only the cold acceptance of fate. "The child will be born soon. Come back with him when the time arrives. Bring no one. The forest itself will swallow any who try to interfere." Kofi nodded, unable to look the sorcerer in the eye, as he turned and retraced his steps. The light of the village broke through the dense trees, almost blinding after the oppressive darkness of the woods. He walked back to his hut, numbness settling over him like a shroud. Isi was sitting outside when he returned, her face lifted to catch the weak sunlight. She looked peaceful for a moment, her eyes closed, lips parted in a small smile. The sight wrenched at his heart, making him falter as he approached. "You're back early," she said, opening her eyes when she sensed his presence. "Did you visit Mama Zola?" Kofi forced a smile, the muscles in his face straining under the weight of the lie. "Yes. I needed to ask about herbs for the soil." She nodded, content with his answer, and reached out her hand for him to take. He did, holding it in silence as they watched the sun slowly descend. The colors of the sky melted together, pinks and oranges mingling until they faded into a deep blue, a canvas painted over their quiet anguish. The weeks passed, and Isi's condition deteriorated. Her cheeks hollowed, and the once strong rhythm of her voice turned into a whisper. The baby, however, was relentless in its growth, pushing against Isi's frail body with a vitality that mocked the sorrow surrounding them. Kofi felt a bitter irony in the strength of his unborn son, a life brimming with promise that he would soon extinguish. One night, Isi's pain reached its peak. She woke with a scream that cut through the night air like a blade, and Kofi bolted upright, his heart pounding in sync with her cries. "The baby is coming," she gasped, clutching her belly as sweat poured down her face. Kofi's body moved on instinct, fetching the bowl of warm water and torn cloths they had prepared days before. He was both healer and husband now, trapped in a moment that blurred joy and dread. The labor was long and grueling. Isi's screams filled the small hut, echoing against the walls as she fought for each breath. Kofi's hands trembled as he wiped her brow, offering what comfort he could while his own pulse raced with terror. The weight of his decision pressed against his chest like an iron band, threatening to break him even before the deed was done. At last, after hours that stretched into a lifetime, a new sound filled the room. The cries of their son, loud and strong, cut through the tension like a burst of sunlight through storm clouds. Kofi held the newborn in his hands, his heart lurching at the sight. The baby's tiny fingers grasped at the air, eyes still shut tight against the world he had entered. A sudden, overwhelming love surged in Kofi's chest, warm and powerful. He looked at Isi, who lay exhausted but smiling weakly, her eyes glassy with joy and relief. "Kweku," she whispered, naming their son as was her right. "Our little blessing." The name caught in Kofi's throat, choking him. A blessing, he thought. But what kind of father takes that blessing and turns it into a curse? He felt a tightness in his chest, the love he felt now mingling with a crushing guilt that threatened to suffocate him. He wrapped the baby in a cloth and handed him to Isi, watching her cradle their son with a tenderness that made him want to weep. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that there was another way, that somehow the gods would show mercy and spare them this horror. But then Isi's face twisted in pain, a groan slipping past her lips as she clutched her side. The reality hit him again, sharp and unforgiving. She was still weak, still dying, and there was only one path to save her. The next night, when the village was asleep and only the sound of crickets broke the silence, Kofi wrapped Kweku in a cloth and stepped out into the cool darkness. The baby was quiet, eyes wide and curious, as if sensing the gravity of the night. Kofi's heart thumped wildly, his palms damp with sweat, as he made his way to the forest. Each step felt like an eternity, the path stretching out before him as though it would never end. The trees, tall and ancient, loomed above him like sentinels. He reached the clearing where Dante stood waiting, his form a shadow against the dim glow of the moon. "You have come," Dante said, his voice as calm as ever, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Kofi. The sorcerer stepped forward, revealing a mortar carved with strange, jagged symbols that seemed to shift in the moonlight. Kofi's arms tightened around Kweku as a tremor ran through him. The baby looked up at him, eyes wide and innocent, as if asking a silent question. Kofi's vision swam as he tried to gather the strength to carry out what he had come to do. Dante stood motionless, his eyes unblinking as he watched Kofi's resolve crumble and build itself again. The sorcerer gestured to the mortar, a silent command that chilled Kofi to his bones. "Place him here," Dante said, his voice devoid of emotion. The silence of the forest pressed in on Kofi, wrapping around him like a shroud. Kofi's arms trembled as he shifted Kweku, whose small, warm body squirmed gently in the bundle of cloth. The baby's soft coos were like tiny daggers, each sound piercing the thin thread of Kofi's resolve. His mind screamed for him to stop, to turn back and find another way, any way, but the vision of Isi, pale and dying, flashed before him, searing the last of his hesitation. "I'm so sorry," Kofi whispered, his voice breaking. His hands moved as if detached from his body, placing Kweku into the cold mortar. The baby's eyes, wide and full of trust, locked with his father's one last time, and Kofi felt his soul fracture. "Do it now." Dante's voice cut through the thick silence like a blade. Kofi's hands shook violently as he lifted the pestle, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of use yet feeling foreign and monstrous in his grip. He squeezed his eyes shut, the tears spilling over, and for a moment he prayed, not for himself, but for Kweku, for Isi, for the gods' forgiveness for what he was about to do. The pestle came down, and the night shattered. Kweku's cry, sharp and sudden, echoed into the trees before dissolving into a silence that felt eternal. Kofi felt the world lurch beneath him, and his knees buckled. He didn't hear the chants that spilled from Dante's lips, nor did he see the strange glow that began to rise from the ground. His heart pounded in his chest, loud and wild, drowning out everything but the weight of what he had done. When the chanting stopped, Kofi forced his eyes open. Dante stood over the mortar, now filled with a viscous dark liquid that seemed to pulse with an unnatural light. The sorcerer dipped his fingers into it, smearing symbols across Kofi's forehead and hands. A sudden rush of warmth surged through Kofi, and in that moment, he felt a power he'd never known, a force that vibrated in his very bones. "Your wealth awaits you, and so does your wife's life," Dante said, his voice flat, without ceremony. "Leave this place and do not return." Kofi stumbled back, unable to tear his eyes away from the mortar. The grief surged within him, clawing at his insides, but his legs moved of their own accord, carrying him away from the clearing. The forest seemed darker, the path twisting beneath his feet as he staggered back toward the village. When he reached his hut, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon, casting a pale light over everything. Kofi collapsed inside, the exhaustion and horror weighing down on him like a boulder. He didn't sleep, couldn't, as he waited for the sun to fully rise and bring the world back to life. Hours later, when Isi stirred, her eyes opened with a clarity he hadn't seen in weeks. The dark circles beneath them were gone, replaced by a soft flush that made her look almost like the woman he had first fallen in love with. She blinked, confusion flickering in her gaze. "Kofi," she called, her voice stronger, like a song returning after a long silence. He forced a smile, his face stiff with the effort. "I am here, Isi." A smile broke across her face, and tears welled in her eyes. "The pain, it's gone." Kofi's chest tightened, a mixture of relief and agony so intense it threatened to consume him. Isi was alive. She was healed. But the cost echoed in the silence that followed, punctuated by the absence of their son's cries. "Where is Kweku?" Isi asked suddenly, looking around the hut as if expecting to see him nestled in a corner. The question struck Kofi like a physical blow, and he struggled to keep his composure. He did not survive the night," he said, the lie burning his tongue. Isi's eyes widened, and her hands flew to her mouth as she stifled a sob. Kofi reached for her, but she turned away, cradling her grief alone. The chasm between them widened, and he knew it would only grow as the truth of his choice gnawed at him in the dark corners of their life. Outside, the village awoke to the news of Isi's miraculous recovery. Neighbors came to offer blessings, their voices a murmur of awe and speculation. Kofi sat numbly as they spoke, their congratulations slicing into him like knives. He glanced at the corner of their hut where a small blanket lay folded, the only remnant of Kweku. The sound of Isi's muffled sobs in the background became the haunting refrain of his sacrifice. That evening, when the visitors had left and silence enveloped their home once more, Kofi felt the first stirrings of what Dante had promised. A glimmer caught his eye, and he turned to see small pieces of gold scattered across their worn floor, as though the earth itself was offering tribute. He should have felt relief, triumph even, but all he felt was the cold, relentless grip of loss. As the moon rose, bathing the hut in its pale glow, Kofi sat by the fire and stared into the flames. The wealth that now promised to flow into their home could not fill the hollow space that Kweku had left behind. Isi's quiet sobs had stopped, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a judgment. The night air carried with it the whisper of the forest, and though no one else would hear it, Kofi knew it was Kweku's final cry, echoing back to him from the shadows, a reminder that some bargains take more than they give. And so, as the first night passed after his unimaginable act, Kofi realized that the true cost of his choice had only begun to show its face. The days that followed were suffocating. Isi's health continued to improve, her strength returning with a swiftness that left the village in awe. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones of miracles, their eyes flicking with curiosity toward Kofi. To them, he was the devoted husband who had not only weathered his wife's near-death but also emerged with newfound fortune. However, beneath the facade, Kofi's world crumbled a little more each day. The small, sudden bursts of gold that appeared in their hut began to grow. Within a week, their once modest home was decorated with trinkets and coins, wealth that could easily buy them a new life. Yet each piece of gold was a silent reminder of what it had cost him. Isi's joy was now tinged with a profound sadness that she carried like a shadow. The absence of Kweku gnawed at her, and Kofi knew that his lie would soon become a festering wound between them. One afternoon, as he returned from tending the field, Kofi found Isi sitting alone, cradling the small blanket that had once wrapped their son. She turned to him when she heard his footsteps, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Do you believe that the spirits of the dead watch over us?" she asked, her voice brittle. Kofi felt the question slice through him. He paused, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. The guilt that had settled in his chest since that night in the forest tightened its grip, stealing his breath. "I like to think Kweku watches over us," Isi continued, turning her gaze to the window where the late afternoon light spilled across the room. That he knows we loved him, even if his time with us was so brief. Kofi's vision blurred as he watched her trace the edges of the blanket. He wanted to tell her the truth, to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness, but fear kept him silent. He turned away, unable to bear the sight of her grief entwined with his own shame. As the weeks turned into months, the wealth that Dante had promised grew. New tools for the fields, fine cloths for Isi, and food that they had once only dreamed of now filled their home. Yet, despite the comfort that surrounded them, the whispers in the village shifted. Some spoke in admiration, others in suspicion. Mama Zola, the old healer, was the first to voice what others only dared to think. "It is strange, isn't it?" she said to another villager as Kofi passed the marketplace. Her voice was low, but he caught the glance she threw his way, sharp and questioning. To recover from death's doorstep and then find such fortune. The spirits are restless. I can feel it. Kofi's pulse quickened. He lowered his gaze and hurried past the stalls, the weight of prying eyes pressing down on him. He could almost hear the judgment in their stares, the invisible fingers pointing at him as if they knew the truth. That night, the village elder, Elder Mensa, paid them an unexpected visit. His stature was formidable, the deep lines of his face carved by years of wisdom and the burden of leading. Kofi felt a chill as Elder Mensa stepped into their hut, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "I have come to bless this house," Elder Mensa announced, though his tone was devoid of warmth. His eyes, sharp and dark as river stones, surveyed the space, taking in the sudden prosperity that lined the walls. Isi, too surprised to speak, nodded and offered him a seat. Elder Mensa placed a hand on Kofi's shoulder, squeezing just enough that it felt like both a greeting and a test. "You have been through much, my son," he said, his gaze unyielding. "The village rejoices in your good fortune, but we are also puzzled. Such blessings come at a price. Have you made peace with the gods?" Kofi's breath caught in his throat. He felt Isi's eyes flicker to him, curious but unaware of the depth behind the question. He forced a smile, one he hoped would mask the dread curling in his stomach. "The gods have shown kindness to Isi and me," he said, choosing each word carefully. "We are grateful for their mercy." Elder Mensa's eyes narrowed slightly, the silence stretching between them like a taut rope, but then he nodded, letting go of Kofi's shoulder and stepping back. He recited a brief blessing, his voice deep and resonant, filling the space with a sense of ritual that made Kofi's skin prickle. When Elder Mensa left, Isi exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Why did that feel more like an interrogation than a blessing?" she asked, her brows furrowed. Kofi couldn't meet her gaze. "People are always suspicious of what they do not understand," he muttered, turning away. He could feel her eyes on his back, searching for answers he wasn't ready to give. The tension between them grew as Isi's strength continued to flourish. She began helping with the village gatherings again, her laughter returning in brief bursts that still held the edge of loss. But when she came home, the silence would wrap around them, thick and suffocating. One night, as Kofi lay staring at the ceiling, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A faint cry, thin and distant, echoed from the direction of the forest. He sat up abruptly, straining to hear. The sound came again, a baby's wail carried by the wind, chilling him to the bone. "Isi, did you hear that?" he whispered. But she was asleep, her breathing soft and steady. He crept outside, the moon casting pale light across the village. The cry came again, more insistent this time, as if calling to him. Kofi's feet moved on their own, carrying him to the edge of the forest. The trees stood like sentinels, their branches swaying in a ghostly dance. He stepped forward, drawn by a force he couldn't name. The cry turned into a whisper, then silence. Only the rustling leaves and his own ragged breathing broke the stillness. "Kofi," a voice hissed, low and mocking. He spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The shadows shifted, and for a moment he thought he saw a tiny figure at the base of the trees, a child watching him with wide, sorrowful eyes. He blinked, and it was gone, leaving him alone with the darkness and the growing certainty that Kweku's spirit was not at peace. When he returned to the hut, the wind had picked up, howling around him as if warning him away from the truth he refused to confront. Isi stirred when he closed the door, her eyes fluttering open. "Kofi, what is it?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Nothing," he lied, his own voice shaking. "Go back to sleep." But neither of them slept well that night. The next morning, Isi noticed the weariness in his face. "Are you unwell?" she asked, placing a hand on his arm as he sat at their small table staring at the untouched food before him. Kofi forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just tired," he said. The lie felt heavier with each repetition, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth, not when it might shatter whatever fragile piece they had left. But Isi's patience wore thin. One evening, as they sat in the dying light of the day, she spoke, her voice firm but tinged with pain. "Kofi, something is wrong. You have been different ever since Kweku. Since that night. You carry a burden that you won't share with me, and I cannot bear it any longer. Please, please tell me what haunts you." The words lodged in his throat like a stone. He could see the anguish in her eyes, the desperation for answers that he had been too cowardly to give. He wanted to tell her, to fall to his knees and confess everything, but the fear of losing her kept him silent. "I cannot," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Please, Isi, let this rest." She stared at him, her expression hardening as the silence grew. "Then it will eat us both alive," she whispered, turning away from him and retreating to the corner where Kweku's blanket still lay. She sat there, her back to him, and the distance between them became an impassable chasm. That night, the cry returned, louder and closer. Kofi lay in bed paralyzed by fear. The whispers in the village grew bolder the next day. Rumors of a restless spirit wandering near the forest spread like wildfire. Some said they'd seen shadows flickering near the forest, small and spectral with eyes like embers. The women who washed clothes by the river spoke of hearing a baby's wail mingled with the rush of water, their eyes darting nervously toward the woods. Mama Zola came to their hut one afternoon, her expression grave. "Kofi, there is talk of strange cries in the night. The spirits are uneasy. If there is something that must be done to appease them, now is the time." Isa's eyes met Kofi's, wide with alarm. He stood motionless, his body cold with dread. The walls of their world were closing in, and he could feel the weight of his secret pressing harder, threatening to crush him beneath it. Kofi's heart was a drumbeat of fear as he stared at Mama Zola. The old healer's eyes were unwavering, dark and knowing, as if she could see right through him. He tried to calm the shiver that ran down his spine, but it was useless. Beside him, Isa's presence was a mix of worry and suspicion. The room which had once been their safe haven felt suffocating. "There is nothing to be done," Kofi said, his voice hoarse. The words felt like ash in his mouth. He met Mama Zola's eyes, willing himself to project confidence, but the old woman's expression didn't change. "Perhaps," she said slowly, letting the word hang in the air. "But spirits do not cry out without reason. If there is something hidden, it will come to light. Spirits demand balance." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving a silence so profound that the soft rustle of her departure seemed deafening. Isi shifted beside him, her eyes searching his face. "What did she mean?" she whispered. Kofi turned away, unable to hold her gaze. "It's just village superstition. You know how people talk." But the look in Isa's eyes told him she wasn't convinced. He could feel her questions pressing against him, silent and heavy. The night came swiftly, as if the sun had fled from the weight of his guilt. Kofi sat at the edge of their bed, unable to sleep. The cries had become more frequent, and the whispers in the village louder. Rumors of a curse, of a wandering spirit, spread like wildfire. Some said they'd seen shadows flickering near the forest, small and spectral with eyes like embers. He ran a hand over his face, the roughness of his calloused skin grounding him for a moment. A cold breeze slipped through the cracks in their hut, carrying with it a faint, unmistakable sound, the cry of an infant. His heart leapt into his throat, and he stood so quickly that Isi stirred. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up with worry in her eyes. Kofi swallowed hard. "Nothing. Just the wind," he said. But even he could hear the lie. Before she could question him, he stepped outside, the night air biting against his skin. The moon hung high, casting the village in silver and shadow. He walked toward the forest, driven by a force he didn't understand. The sound of the crying grew louder, urgent and echoing through the trees. Each step was heavier than the last, as if unseen hands were pulling him back, trying to prevent him from reaching whatever waited for him in the dark. The forest loomed ahead, a wall of tangled branches and secrets. He stepped inside, and the familiar dread settled over him, squeezing his chest. The trees whispered, their leaves shivering as though sharing secrets. The crying stopped suddenly, leaving an unbearable silence that made his ears ring. "Kofi," a voice said, soft and mournful. He spun around, eyes wide. A figure stood in the dim light, small and shadowy. It took him a moment to realize it was not a figure at all but an outline, a phantom. The shape of a child, translucent and flickering like a candle's flame, stared at him with eyes that glowed with sorrow. Kweku. His son. Kofi's legs buckled, and he fell to his knees. The forest seemed to close in, pressing down on him as he gasped for air. "No, no. This is not real," he whispered. But the vision didn't waver. The figure reached out a tiny hand, and though it couldn't touch him, Kofi felt the coldness seep into his bones. "I'm sorry," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry." The ghostly figure blinked, eyes shimmering with unshed tears, before fading into the dark. The cries resumed, softer this time, as if receding deeper into the forest. Kofi's chest heaved with sobs that tore through him, raw and unforgiving. When he finally stood, the forest was quiet, the echoes of Kweku's cries lingering in his mind. He stumbled back to the village, his steps unsteady. Dawn was just beginning to break, casting pale light over the world, but the warmth did nothing to ease the chill in his heart. The village was alive with noise as he returned. Word had spread about strange sightings near the forest, and people gathered in groups, their voices overlapping in worry and accusation. He caught sight of Mama Zola, her sharp eyes fixed on him as he passed. She said nothing, but the weight of her gaze was enough to tell him she suspected more than he dared to admit. At home, Isi waited, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep. She took one look at him and knew something had changed. "Kofi, you must tell me what is happening," she said, her voice trembling. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a knock sounded at their door. It was Elder Mensa, the village elder, flanked by two men with grim expressions. "Kofi," Elder Mensa said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "There are whispers of spirits crying out and visions of a child. The village demands answers." Isi looked from Elder Mensa to Kofi, confusion and fear mingling in her eyes. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice small. Kofi felt his throat close up. He glanced at the elder, at the accusing eyes of the men behind him, and finally at Isi. The lies he had built were crumbling, and there was nowhere left to run. "I need everyone to leave," he said, his voice breaking. "Except Isi." Elder Mensa's eyebrows shot up, but he nodded. "We will wait outside. You have until sundown to explain yourself, Kofi. If the spirits are restless, they must be appeased." The men filed out, leaving Isi standing with her arms wrapped around herself. "What have you done?" she asked, tears brimming in her eyes. Kofi sank to the floor, unable to hold back the flood of guilt any longer. "I did it for you," he whispered. "I did it to save you." "What did you do?" Isi's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through him sharper than any blade. He took a deep breath, the weight of his secret finally too heavy to bear. "When you were sick, I sought out Dante, the sorcerer. He promised me wealth and the cure for your illness. But in return, I had to give him Kweku." Isi's eyes widened, and she staggered back as if struck. No, that's not true," she said, shaking her head. The blanket fell from her arms, forgotten. "Tell me that's not true, Kofi." "I wish I could," he said, tears streaming down his face. "But it is. I sacrificed him to save you." The room was silent, save for Isi's ragged breathing. She collapsed onto the floor, sobs tearing through her as she clutched her stomach. You killed our son. How could you?" Kofi crawled to her, reaching out but stopping just short of touching her. "I thought I was saving you. I thought it was the only way." Isi's eyes met his, filled with a fury and pain he had never seen. "You chose to play God, Kofi. And now we are cursed." A knock sounded again at the door, but neither of them moved. The voices outside grew louder, calling for Kofi, demanding answers. Isi pushed herself away from him, her face hardening. "Go to them," she said, her voice flat. "Face what you have done. I cannot bear to look at you." Kofi rose shakily, his body numb, as he opened the door. Elder Mensah stood there, eyes narrowing as he took in Kofi's broken expression. "Are you ready to confess?" Elder Mensah asked, his voice low and unyielding. Kofi nodded, stepping out into the light where the villagers waited. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red glow across the sky as if the heavens themselves mourned. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces that had once been familiar but now seemed distant, foreign. "I did it," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "I sacrificed my son to save Isi." A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs and cries of disbelief. Mama Zola stepped forward, her expression grave. "Then the cries we hear are Kweku's spirit, unavenged and restless." The villagers looked at him with a mixture of horror and rage. Some stepped back, crossing themselves, while others spat curses. Elder Mensah raised his hand, silencing them. "Kofi, the spirits demand justice. You have brought a great evil upon us." Kofi closed his eyes, the finality of the elder's words sealing his fate. The cries of Kweku echoed in his mind, and for the first time, he understood that some choices could never be undone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the village prepared for a ritual to appease the spirits. Isi watched from the shadows, tears streaking her face as she whispered, "Kweku, forgive us." And in the deep of the forest, where the wind whispered secrets only the trees could understand, the village fire blazed high into the night, casting wild, flickering shadows across the gathered crowd. The heat licked at Kofi's skin, but he barely felt it. He stood at the center, surrounded by faces he had known his whole life, faces now twisted with anger, disbelief, and a fear that seemed to seep into the ground beneath their feet. Elder Mensah raised his arms, silencing the murmurs that ran like an undercurrent through the assembly. "The spirits have been wronged," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Kofi's betrayal has disturbed the balance, and now we must set it right." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd, punctuated by the sound of wooden drums beating a steady, samba rhythm. Mama Zola stepped forward holding a bundle of herbs and a small clay bowl filled with dark, glistening oil. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes locked on Kofi with a mix of pity and condemnation. "To restore balance, we must call upon the spirit of the lost," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "We will ask for Kweku's forgiveness and offer a sacrifice to appease his restless soul." Kofi's chest tightened. The idea of appeasing Kweku's spirit felt hollow, impossible. How could any ritual erase what he had done? Isi stood at the edge of the circle, her face a mask of pain. She hadn't spoken to him since his confession, and the distance between them felt like an ocean, deep and unforgiving. Mama Zola sprinkled the oil over the fire, and a plume of smoke rose, carrying a sharp, acrid scent that made Kofi's eyes water. She began chanting in the old tongue, her voice rising and falling in a cadence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The crowd joined in, their voices melding together in a low, mournful hum. Kofi's vision blurred as the smoke thickened, swirling in patterns that seemed to move with a life of their own. The air grew colder, biting into his skin despite the heat of the flames. And then, through the shifting smoke, he heard it, a soft cry, distant at first but growing louder, more insistent. It was Kweku's voice, unmistakable and raw with sorrow. The crowd faltered, some gasping as they heard the sound. Mama Zola's chant wavered, and she looked around with wide eyes. The drumming stopped abruptly, leaving a heavy silence that pressed down on them all. "Kweku," Isi whispered, stepping forward. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out toward the sound as if she could touch the child they had lost. The cry echoed again, this time mingled with a rustling in the trees beyond the firelight. The branches of the nearest trees shivered, their leaves rustling even though there was no wind. A chill ran through Kofi as a small figure stepped from the shadows, pale and flickering like a candle flame. The crowd recoiled, some screaming and others crossing themselves. The figure was Kweku, but not as Kofi had last seen him. His eyes, dark and full of sadness, stared straight at his father. Kofi fell to his knees, unable to hold the gaze of his son's ghost. "Forgive me," he whispered, his voice breaking. The weight of his guilt pressed him into the earth, making it hard to breathe. Kweku's figure did not move, but the sorrow in his eyes deepened, and the sound of his crying rose, filling the night air with an unbearable, piercing wail. Mama Zola stepped back, clutching her herbs as though they could protect her from the force that now stirred among them. The elders exchanged worried glances, their confidence in the ritual fading as the spirit's cries grew louder. Elder Mensa stepped forward, his voice strong but tinged with fear. "Kweku, hear us. We seek to bring peace to your spirit. What must be done?" The ghostly child's eyes shifted from Kofi to the elder, and for a moment, the crying stopped. Silence fell over the crowd, and a breathless tension settled over them. Then, in a voice that was small but clear, Kweku spoke. "Justice." The word resonated like a drumbeat, simple but final. The crowd shifted, eyes darting to Kofi, whose face had gone pale. Isi let out a sob, her hands covering her mouth as she staggered back. The fire crackled and sputtered as if in agreement, casting red light that painted their faces with streaks of flame. "Justice must be done," Mama Zola repeated, her voice trembling. She turned to Elder Mensa, who nodded gravely. Kofi stood, swaying as he tried to steady himself. "I accept whatever punishment the spirits demand," he said, his voice steady now, resigned. The crowd parted as Elder Mensa approached him, the old man's eyes heavy with sorrow. "You must leave, Kofi. You will be exiled from this village, never to return. It is the only way to appease the spirit of your son and restore balance." Elder Mensa declared. The crowd gasped, some murmuring in agreement while others looked uncertain. Exile was a fate worse than death. It was a life stripped of belonging, a wandering existence marked by shame. Kofi nodded, the finality of the sentence settling over him like a shroud. He glanced at Isi, who stood motionless, her face unreadable through her tears. "Isi," he whispered. But she turned away, unable to meet his eyes. With the elder's words ringing in his ears, Kofi stepped out of the circle of light, the murmurs of the crowd following him into the darkness. He walked to their hut one last time, gathering what little he could carry. The gold, the symbols of the bargain he had struck, lay gleaming on the floor, but he felt no urge to take it. It was a cursed weight he would not bring with him. As he stepped outside, the forest seemed to breathe around him, the cries of Kweku fading into the rustle of the leaves. He looked back at the village, the place where he had built his life, and found Isi standing in the doorway, the blanket in her hands. "Goodbye, Isi," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't respond, but as he turned away, he thought he saw her shoulders shake, a silent grief that mirrored his own. Kofi walked until the village lights were just a memory, replaced by the deep shadows of the forest. The path was unfamiliar, a twisting corridor of trees that seemed to close in around him. Each step echoed in his ears, accompanied by the whispers of the spirits that now shared his path. For days he wandered, the weight of his guilt and loss pressing down on him like a relentless storm. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by dreams of Kweku's eyes full of sorrow and accusation. The world around him blurred into an endless expanse of trees and silence, a prison with no walls. One night, as he sat by a small fire he'd managed to build, a sound reached him, a soft, gentle cry. His heart clenched, and he turned slowly, eyes searching the darkness. A shadow moved at the edge of the firelight, and there, just for a moment, he saw Kweku. The boy's ghostly figure stood silent, watching him. But this time there was no accusation, only a look of sadness and something else, acceptance. Kofi fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I am sorry," he said, the words torn from his soul. "I am so sorry, my son." The figure of Kweku blinked once, slowly, before fading into the night. The forest grew quiet again, the only sound the crackle of the dying fire. Kofi's heart, still heavy with loss, felt the smallest shift, as if a part of his burden had been lifted, not by forgiveness, but by acknowledgement. He knew that he would walk this path alone, that the spirits would always whisper and the past would always haunt him. But as he sat under the vast, indifferent sky, Kofi understood that this was his justice, a life marked by endless atonement. And so, The man who had sacrificed everything for love sat in the cold embrace of the forest, where the cries of his son became the wind and the shadows his only companions. The forest had grown colder, the days bleeding into nights as Kofi wandered, a man stripped of everything but guilt. The world around him was a prison, boundless yet suffocating. He no longer counted days. Time was an ache that pulsed within him, as constant as the beat of his heart. The ghostly visits from Kweku had become less frequent, but the absence of the boy's cries left an even deeper silence, a silence that spoke of judgment rather than peace. The weight of the sacrifice gnawed at Kofi, a hollow pain that filled every moment. He avoided villages, choosing instead the isolation of the forest and the open paths where he met no one's eyes. His body thinned with the weeks, sustained by what meager fruits and roots he could gather, but his spirit grew heavier, burdened by the sins that kept replaying in his mind. One afternoon, as a storm gathered overhead, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of burning wood and distant voices. He paused, the first stirrings of curiosity breaking through the wall of numbness. Following the sound, he came upon a clearing where a cluster of huts stood, modest and worn like the lives they housed. It was not Ooredoo, but it felt achingly familiar, a community of farmers and traders whose days revolved around survival. Kofi stayed at the edge of the clearing, hidden in the shadows, watching the people move with purpose and laughter that seemed as far away as a dream. He longed for the warmth of human connection but knew he was a ghost among the living, first to haunt the world alone. Then he heard it, a voice that broke through the fog in his mind and speared straight to his heart. It was the soft, melodic hum of a lullaby, a song Isi had once sung to their unborn child. He froze, the memories flooding back with such force that he felt breathless. Stepping forward, he strained to see the source of the song. It came from a woman sitting outside one of the huts, her back to him. She held a child in her lap, rocking gently as she sang. Kofi's vision blurred as he took a step closer, then another. The woman turned, and his heart seized. It was Isi. Her eyes had lost the brightness they once held, but there was a resilience there, a strength forged in the fires of grief. She didn't see him, her gaze focused on the child who clutched her fingers, a child with wide, curious eyes that reflected the sunlight. It wasn't Kweku, and yet the sight stung as if it were. Kofi's knees weakened, and he leaned against a tree, unable to move closer. Isi's voice wavered as she finished the lullaby, her expression softening with a love that no longer belonged to him. The realization hit Kofi with crushing clarity. Life had moved on without him, leaving him behind to rot in the choices he had made. Suddenly, Isi's eyes lifted and met his. The world seemed to pause as recognition flickered across her face, followed by disbelief and a shadow of anger. She stood, cradling the child against her chest, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. "Kofi," she whispered, the name sounding foreign on her lips. He took a step forward, his body trembling. "Esi, I." The words died in his throat, useless and small against the vast chasm between them. The village around them grew quiet, sensing the tension that crackled like lightning. A man stepped out from one of the nearby huts, tall and broad-shouldered with kind eyes that turned wary as he looked from Isi to Kofi. "Who is this?" the man asked, his arm moving protectively around Isi's shoulders. "A ghost," Isi replied, her voice shaking. "A ghost who has come to haunt the living." Kofi flinched, the pain of her words cutting deeper than any blade. The child in her arms began to whimper, sensing the unease, and Isi rocked him gently, her eyes never leaving Kofi's. "I had to see you," Kofi said, his voice hoarse. "I needed to know that you were well." "Well," Isi repeated, a bitter smile pulling at her lips. "You destroyed our life, Kofi. You took our son, our future, for a bargain with death. How could we be well after that?" The man beside her, understanding dawning on his face, stepped back, his expression hardening. The villagers began to gather, whispers spreading through the crowd like fire. "You must go," the man said, his voice firm. "Leave this place before more pain follows." Kofi's eyes filled with tears as he looked at Isi one last time. She was alive. Her pain was visible but no longer paralyzing. She had found a way to live, to carry on without him. His presence here was an intrusion, a wound reopened that should have been left to heal. "Forgive me," he said, though he knew the words were meaningless. He turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last, as the voices of the villagers faded behind him. Night fell, and the storm that had threatened all day finally broke. Rain lashed the trees, drumming against the earth in a relentless rhythm. Kofi found shelter beneath an outcropping of rock, his body shivering as the cold seeped into his bones. He stared out into the dark, the guilt and regret a steady throb in his chest. "Justice," Kweku's voice whispered, a memory that had become a companion. The storm's wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and leaves. Kofi closed his eyes, letting the rain wash over him, a penance that could never cleanse his soul but offered a fleeting moment of reprieve. When the storm passed, he emerged into a world washed clean but still haunted. The moon shone pale and distant, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for him. He wandered deeper into the forest, drawn to the place where the story had begun, the clearing where Dante had sealed his fate. The hut stood as he remembered, dark and foreboding. Kofi stepped inside, the silence pressing down on him. Dust covered the floor, and the symbols carved into the walls seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. He knelt, tracing the outline of the mortar where Kweku's life had been taken. "Dante," he called, his voice steady. "I have come for answers." The shadows shifted, and the sorcerer appeared, emerging as if from the very air itself. His eyes gleamed, cold and detached, as he regarded Kofi. "You return, even after all has been lost," Dante said, folding his arms. "I return for justice," Kofi said, meeting the sorcerer's gaze without flinching. "You promised me salvation, but all I have is this endless torment." Dante tilted his head, a faint smile playing at his lips. "I gave you what you asked for. The price was set, and you paid it willingly. Blame not the giver of bargains, but the heart that seeks them." Kofi's hands clenched into fists. "Then let me pay again. Let my life be taken to grant Kweku peace." Dante's eyes narrowed, the amusement fading. Sacrifice given out of regret does not balance the scales. Only when the heart seeks to restore, not to ease its own suffering, will the spirits be satisfied. Kofi stared at the sorcerer, realization dawning like a cruel dawn. There would be no easy path, no single act that could atone for what he had done. The life he had taken was beyond his reach, and peace would not come by sacrificing his own. The path forward was long and full of thorns, a journey of humility and service that would not erase his guilt but might one day honor his son's memory. He nodded, understanding at last. Without another word, he turned and left the clearing, the shadows of the forest closing behind him like a book being shut. Kofi wandered for years, seeking out villages where he could help others, telling his story as a warning and a lesson. He mended broken roofs, tilled barren fields, and sat by the fires of the dying, offering comfort where he could not offer salvation. His name spread, a tale of a man who had paid the highest price for love and learned that redemption was not a gift, but a path. One night, as he sat by a fire in an unfamiliar village, a child approached him, eyes wide with curiosity. "Why do you travel so much, old man?" the boy asked. Kofi smiled, the lines of his face deep but softened with time. "To remember," he said, looking up at the stars that watched silently from above. "And to teach others never to forget." The boy sat beside him, listening as Kofi began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of lessons learned too late. "Thanks for watching. If you watched the story till the end, I have a few questions for you. How far would you go to save someone you love? And when does that sacrifice become too much? Is it possible to truly make up for the worst mistakes, or is forgiveness something that only others can give? Would you accept a life of suffering to make amends for a wrong you can never undo? Please leave the answers in the comments below, and what you learned from the story. As you ponder over these questions and the lessons from the story, here is another interesting story that you will enjoy. Click to watch it now.